From Washington, D.C., welcome to the 2020 Republican National Convention.
Ladies and gentlemen, leaders and fighters for freedom and liberty and the American dream, the best is yet to come.
Oh, please. Look, it's hard to respond to all of the bloviations and lies spewed at the Republican convention, but I'm going to respond to the most blatant whoppers.
We will protect Medicare and Social Security. We will always and very strongly protect patients with pre-existing conditions. And that is a pledge from the entire Republican Party.
Rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. Even before COVID, Trump's latest budget included millions in cuts to Medicare and Social Security. Now, his proposed payroll tax cut would completely defund Social Security by 2023, according to a report by the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration. Look, meanwhile, a group of Republican states backed by the Department of Justice and the Trump administration is trying to completely strike down the Affordable Care Act in the Supreme Court. The Trump administration has no plan to replace it with anything, meaning that nearly 30 million people would lose their health insurance in the middle of a global pandemic, and protections for pre-existing conditions would be gone.
Over the past 3 months, we have gained over 9 million jobs, and that's a record in the history of our country.
Baloney. Now, it's true that the United States gained more than 9 million jobs between May and July, but hello, it actually lost more than 22 million jobs in March and April. So it's a net loss. Hello? The economy is still down nearly 13 million jobs because of a pandemic that Donald Trump did nothing to control. Not to mention many of the jobs added were simply people returning to work after temporary layoffs.
In economic terms, folks, this is no time for a $4 trillion tax hike. Coming out of the deep pandemic, who in their right mind would pick the pockets of taxpayers and drain money from their wallets and purses?
You know, I spent years debating Larry Kudlow on CNBC, and it was hard. It was tough, because almost everything that came out of his mouth turned out to be either untruthful or a prediction that was full of baloney. Larry Kudlow has made an entire career out of being dead wrong all the time, and the statements he made at the Republican National Convention were no different. According to him, we had all the money in the world to give corporations a $500 billion bailout at the start of the pandemic. But now that 180,000 Americans, more than 180,000 Americans, are dead and millions are on the brink of eviction and poverty, he says it's time to tighten the belt. Well, that's Larry Kudlow for you. The best way to revive the economy is to get money back into people's pockets, which means passing another stimulus bill. We'll be trapped in an even deeper, longer economic recession if Congress does not pass another one.
President Trump built the most inclusive economy ever. 7 million jobs created pre-COVID-19. We put hard-earned tax dollars back in people's pockets by cutting their taxes.
Oh my Lord. I mean, first off, Trump didn't build anything. He inherited a strong economy from Barack Obama. Average quarterly economic growth under Trump through 2019 was 2.5%. Nowhere near the 4% he promised. Average quarterly growth in Obama's second term was almost exactly the same, 2.4%. In fact, if you look at the job numbers, what you find is that unemployment dropped faster during Obama's second term than it did in Trump's first 3 years. In terms of tax cuts, Trump's signature tax cut was hardly a boon to everyday Americans. By 2027, the richest 1% will have received 83% of the Trump tax cut, and the richest 1/10 of 1%, 60%. But more than half of all Americans will pay more in taxes. And as usual, nothing is trickling down to workers. Corporations spent more of their tax savings buying back their shares of their own stock than increasing workers' wages. But all of this is moot because it refers to the economy before COVID. The fact of the matter is Trump's abject failure to contain the coronavirus has led to a deep economic crisis that's putting millions of Americans at risk of debt, hunger, poverty, eviction. He and his lackeys are trying to gaslight the country into thinking that we're not living through this ongoing crisis. They're trying to make us believe that Trump has acted to prevent it when in fact he has refused to act to prevent this crisis.
The violence and bloodshed we are seeing in these and other cities isn't happening by chance. It's the direct result of refusing to allow law enforcement to protect our communities.
Oh, please. Mikhail is right about one thing. The unrest we're seeing in cities across the country is not happening by chance. But his reasoning is wholly incorrect, and the reasoning of the Trump administration and Donald Trump, wholly incorrect. Americans are rising up because police continue to shoot down and murder unarmed black people with impunity. And when a white right-wing teen with an AR-15 kills people, what happens? They turn a blind eye. Now, this is important, folks. Centuries of systemic racism and our continued investment in social control has perpetuated ongoing violence against black people, politically, physically, and economically. And what's the result? People are rising up to demand a world in which the full humanity and dignity of black people is finally realized and recognized. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has actively ignored and downplayed the rising threat of white supremacist violence, choosing to stoke fears about imaginary left-wing violence when the real threat is far-right extremist domestic terrorism. Let's be clear about that. We saw it just this week with Kyle Rittenhouse.
And after years of scandal that robbed our veterans of the care that you earned in the uniform of the United States, President Trump kept his word again. We reformed the VA, and Veterans Choice is now available for every veteran in America.
Well, that's nice. But what Mike Pence leaves out is that the Veterans Choice Act was co-written and co-sponsored by Senators Bernie Sanders and John McCain, and President Obama signed it into law in 2014. All Trump did was continue the program and expand eligibility, but his own Veterans Administration secretary has said that it will take years to fully implement the expanded program.
As the only leader in Washington not from either New York or California, I consider it my responsibility to look out for Middle America.
Oh, Mitch McConnell, oh, Lord. Nothing says looking out for Middle America like blocking expanded unemployment benefits, Mitch McConnell, and then leaving for vacation without delivering desperately needed relief to the American people, Mitch McConnell. Look, as a reminder, McConnell recently urged lawmakers to be cautious about helping struggling Americans because, he said, debt is a matter of genuine concern. Funny enough, he could care less about debt. When he handed corporations a $500 billion blank check in the CARES Act, or engineered a $1.9 trillion tax cut for corporations and the super rich in 2017. Hello, Mitch McConnell. It's clear who you work for. It is not Middle America. Look, the Republican National Convention lies are just a preview of what's to come in the next 2 months. Vote the liar-in-chief and his enablers out in November and share this video with anyone you think watched this dangerous propaganda misinformation parade. Stay vigilant. The worst, sadly, is yet to come.